Hikaru Nakamura and Magnus Carlsen have become two of the finest and most prominent players nowadays. Magnus, a Norwegian, became famous around the globe in 2013 after he successfully upheld his position as world chess champion for the first time. Carlsen is lauded for his exceptional positional knowledge, endgame prowess, and adaptable playing style, which have helped him achieve such widespread success. Hikaru, a Japanese-American chess grandmaster, plays offensively and cautiously. He's considered one of the best speed and blitz chess enthusiasts globally, earning him the moniker H-Bomb for his ferocious style of play. In round 4 of the Tata Steel Chess 2019, hosted in India for the inaugural time, Magnus and Hikaru competed in a quick game. As a result, both players were on the edge of their seats for the whole game. In this video, we will look into this match when Magnus mentally checkmated Hikaru. Opening moves: Magnus versus Hikaru. The match began with Magnus making the move c4, and Hikaru reacted with e5. After that, Magnus moved his knight to c3, while Hikaru went to f6. As a result, the English opening originated. The game continued with Magnus's knight on f3, striking Hikaru's pawn on e5, and Hikaru's knight on c6. And with that, we were in the 4 knights position, with Magnus embracing t3. The open Sicilian was up next for Hikaru. Hikaru moved the knight to d5, and Magnus countered with a reverse Sveshnikov. Unfortunately for Hikaru, he messed up his opening knight f4. A puzzled look formed on Magnus's face as he watched Hikaru's actions. After Magnus stood up from his chair, Hikaru gave it a second glance and then played f4 to prevent him from stepping up. Magnus, though, played d4 and left. After a short pause, Hikaru played bishop d6 and Magnus responded with h3. Hikaru then played a6 and Magnus responded by moving his bishop to c4. After Hikaru bishop's return, Magnus moved to e5 and the next step was d5. After being attacked by Hikaru's knight on f5, Magnus's bishop returned to a2 from c4. The bishop may have advanced to b7, but Hikaru moved to b5 instead. Then, Magnus used short castles to protect his king, while Hikaru chose f6. Magnus attempted a central breakaway by aiming for b4. Magnus took Hikaru's knight after he moved it from position a5 to position c4. The complex mid-game position, Hikaru then moved the bishop to c4, and Magnus followed with e6, cornering the bishop on c8. With his bishop moved to b7, Hikaru seemed confident that he might mount a comeback. With queen d4, though, Magnus took the lead. To create space for his bishops, Hikaru performed a brilliant move on c6. Hikaru was put on hold by Magnus' queen, who captured his c4, and Hikaru took on d5. Magnus took control of the pawn on f4, but things quickly became complicated. After that, Hikaru made an effort to eliminate the queen. Magnus, who was running out of time, moved to queen e3. Hikaru executed the a5 move. After placing his knight on d4, Magnus proceeded to f5. After a few moves, Hikaru moved bishop b8, rook c1, and rook c4 from Magnus, and finally a knight to d4. At this point, Hikaru had 10 minutes left on the timer, whereas Magnus just had 2 minutes and 53 seconds remaining. Immediately following this move, Hikaru pinched Magnus on b4, but Magnus quickly regained the pawn. The game heated up a bit when Hikaru shifted the bishop to position a7. After Hikaru moved the bishop to position c5, Magnus advanced the pawn to b5. Magnus won another pawn when he advanced his queen to d3, and Hikaru played him at b6. Magnus took Hikaru's on c4, and Hikaru returned the favor by taking Magnus's. The final sequence and resignation. Magnus promoted his queen to position c4. After additional pawns and captures were made, the game appeared to be heading toward an equal result. Magnus had barely 40 seconds to decide, so he went g3. The king then moved to g2, and the rook attacked the pawn on b5. Magnus then advanced his rook to position c1, while Hikaru repositioned his bishop to f8. Now Magnus' knight was in position d4, while Hikaru was in position h5. Hikaru aimed for a comedic result here. Magnus made a knight e6 move. Once more, Hikaru was unable to take on b5. Instead, he went for the rook with bishop a3. With a few seconds remaining, Magnus moved his rook to position c3. Bishop b4 was played by Hikaru, while Magnus took queen b4. Magnus advanced his rook to c5 in response to Hikaru's queen at e6. Magnus had a pawn up in this position, but a draw was possible at the end of the match. The weakness of Hikaru's king and the h5 pawn were his biggest problems. With about 50 seconds left, Hikaru moved his rook to position d8. The queen was moved to position f3, the pawn to position g6, and the rook to position d7. The king advanced to c6, the queen relocated to c8, and the rook checked c8. After that, a quick rook to c7, a check by the queen to d5, the queen moving to d5, the rook to d5, and the pawn to b7 were played. Ultimately, Magnus moved his pawn to position f4. After a few seconds of thought, Hikaru surrendered. That's all for this video. Leave your thoughts on this moment. Also, take a minute out and subscribe to our channel. Stay tuned. See you soon.